Welcome back to our course on Indian economy, policy and environment. We were discussing the module 2 of the course, and this is about planning in India. And we have already done our first session under this module, where we have talked about the planning for development as a strategy in post-independence India. In this session, we will try to look at the aspects of decentralized planning, and we will also try to see how decentralized planning is actually a part of the larger strategy that was followed by post-independent planning regime. I am Professor Joydeep Barua, Director, School of Social Sciences, K.K. Hendick State Open University. We have set 4 broad themes for today's discussion. First, we will try to understand the socio-political context in which planning in India was conceived as a part of the process of democratic decentralization. Second, we will try to explain the meaning of decentralization and decentralized planning in India. Then we will try to outline the processes of decentralized planning in India. And finally, we will try to see the significance and present status of decentralized planning in India. So these are the broad 4 themes where we will try to see the main issues and main concerns related to decentralized planning in India. Let me begin with the context and a background that we have discussed in our earlier module, that is the earlier session. We have seen that planning for development as a role of state in the economy in general and economic development in particular. And we have sort of tried to understand what are the justifications for which role of state can be envisaged in economy. And we have seen 2 cases where we can justify state intervention in the economy. The first is the market failure. The neoclassical theory, as I have discussed, suggested that free market will lead to a Pareto optimum outcome. But we have seen that such optimum is reached only when certain assumptions are fulfilled and certain conditions are there in the market. So therefore, if those assumptions and conditions are not there, then market eventually fails, which does not produce Pareto optimum, and therefore we need state intervention. At the same time, we have seen the second reason for state intervention largely due to the social justice. The market is largely exclusionary, and therefore there is a greater possibility that even if the free market operates optimally, there will be issues related to equity, and therefore the state needs to intervene, and to ensure the social justice, state has to act actively. So these are the broad conditions based on which we have said that role of state in the economy or economic development can be justified. We have also discussed the specific conditions of India at the time of independence, and we have said that there were 2 things together where India had to intervene. The first was about the rebuilding the nation, that India got independence from British colonialism, and under colonialism, the Indian economy was in a very bad shape. So therefore, whatever resources India could have needed to be utilized in a best possible way so that the nation's economy can be rebuilt. And that largely related to the question of efficiency, the greatest possible results with limited amount of resources. At the same time, India adopted a constitution giving the citizens the set of rights and set of responsibilities. So therefore, there was a demand or popular concern for fulfilling the aspirations of citizens. And these citizens are lacking basic needs. There were huge unemployment, mass poverty was there. So therefore, it was a duty of the newly independent state to fulfill the aspirations of the large masses of people, and that related to the equity concerns. And India had to negotiate these two in a broad scale, and therefore planning was seen as an instrument by which you have to balance efficiency with equity. Now, if we look at the history, or if we look at the theoretical background of state intervention, you can have actually three types of interventions. And if you go through this small book by Amit Bhaduri and Deepak Nair, then there are discussions that these three types of interventions are extremely critical to understand role of state in the economy. The first one is a functional intervention. Functional intervention is one where state wants to correct the different functions of the economy. Suppose if prices are not there or prices are inadequate to signal, then you can set it right by intervening in the economy. So that's the functional kind of intervention. Second one is strategic intervention, where you need to guide the economy. You have to set the goals, you have to direct the resources, and strategically you have to steer the economy. And third one is institutional, where you have to frame rules, you have to frame laws, regulations, so that the market can operate under certain conditions. So therefore, in a sense, the planning in India can be seen both as a strategic as well as institutional intervention. India adopted planning to govern as well as to regulate the economy, and also to guide the economy in terms of setting priorities, goals, and also allocating different sets of resources. And accordingly, we have seen that planning commission was set up. So this was the background and this was the context we have already discussed, and now we will try to utilize this context for our discussion today. And we have also seen that there were 4 goals so far planning in India is concerned. These are overarching goals. You have to transform the country from poverty to prosperity, and you need to have the economic growth. It was necessary for improving the conditions of the people. At the same time, it was also necessary to generate resources for the state to launch a series of welfare programs. And therefore, equity and social justice, later on, ideas of balanced growth, and finally inclusive growth was there, very much a part of the planning in India. And one attempt was to sort of modernize the economy within the country, and that required a kind of support and protection. So all these were actually attempted by planning in India during the early phase of our economic interventions. Now, we need to understand that for India, the planning was not only an economic imperative. It was, of course, an economic instrument, as I have said, but it was also necessary for social and political purposes. So the planning was necessary as a social and political instrument also, which was very much needed. Now, for this, we need to understand the kind of democracy India launched after independence. We have actually attempted democracy on a very unique setting, that you have tried to put forward a political equality which was attempted over visible social and economic inequalities. For instance, in India, social inequality in terms of caste and economic inequality in terms of class were very much there. These were palpable, these were visible, but at the same time, despite these social and economic divisions, Indian planners have decided to have a plan that will supplement the requirements of functional democracy. The democracy can be functional only when these principles of political, social, and economic inequality are coincided. So this was a particular setting in which you need to understand the planning in India. The planning was not only an economic imperative, of course it was an economic imperative, but at the same time, planning had some larger social and political goal. And goal was to establish a kind of the environment where democracy can be functional. You can address the social and economic issues as well as political issues, and thereby you can actually root the democracy into the society and its functioning in the country. So making democracy functional was a kind of complementary role envisaged from planning in India. So this is where the decentralization will be extremely helpful to be contextualized. Now, when we have the decentralization, you can have a meaning of decentralization as the sharing of powers and collective decision making. These are the two core components of decentralization. That the authority or power should not be concentrated on a single hand, and it has to be shared so that everybody can make their own decisions, and which will make the decision participatory. So that's the core idea of decentralization, and this decentralization will ensure that decisions are not centralized and coercive on the citizens. They are very much part of this decision. So that's the kind of decentralization that was envisaged. So decentralized planning, therefore, means how powers are shared and decisions are arrived at regarding goals and priorities, as well as resources are mobilized and allocated in each planning units. So therefore, when you have to have a plan, national plan, this is to be decentralized up to the grassroots. The country was there, state was there, and then sub-state level, different local bodies and different government institutions are required to plan. And you need to institutionalize this planning process by means of the powers and sharing of the resources. At the same time, you have to allow to set their own goals and priorities and plan accordingly. So that's the meaning of decentralized planning. Now, one needs to distinguish between the decentralization per se or specific connotation of decentralization that is being used in this discussion. Now, clearly, everybody can plan, but that cannot really be considered as a part of decentralization. Decentralization in this sense, there's a sense in which we are using the term as decentralized planning. Now, you have a very distinct connotation when we talk about decentralization or decentralized planning in India. Now, that meaning is that whatever is the planning unit, planning for development, they can set their goals, they can set their priorities, powers are given, resources are allocated, they can set aside the resources for different objectives and also goals. But these units are to be a part of formal state structure. The formal state structure as defined in the Constitution. Now, Constitution had the center and the state, and in initial phases, there were discussions on the local government institutions like panchayats and urban local bodies, but these were not really a part of the formal state structure as defined within the constitutional federalism in the country. Now, when the 73rd, we will come to this again, 73rd and 74th Amendment took place, then we have made these PRIs and ULBs part of the formal state structure. it required several things. You have to have the share of power clearly defined in the constitution, statutorily defined, and you can have the institution that will allow sharing of the resources, and you have to have an entity for planning. So these are the three components through which this decentralization actually works. So earlier we had the three lists of functions: central list, state list, and concurrent list, where the subjects are defined, who is going to have powers over what kind of things. Central list define the things which are under central control, that is union government. The state list gives the exclusive power to the states to legislate, to regulate. Concurrent list gives the such things which are both can actually operate, both can legislate and regulate. Now, under 73rd and 74th Amendment, 11th and 12th schedule was added, defining the powers delegated to the local governance, local government institutions. The 11th schedule defines 29 subjects to the panchayats, and 12th schedule defines 18 subjects to the ULBs. So therefore, you have these three tier of governments, the central, state, and local government bodies in terms of PRIs and ULBs, all statutorily defined within the constitution, and they are very much part of the Indian federal structure. So you have the state list, you have the central list, you have the concurrent list defining the sharing of the powers between state and the center. At the same time, you have also got the 11th and 12th schedule that defines the powers delegated to the PRIs and the ULBs as local government institutions. So this decision to participate and decision to decide about the priorities and goals, allocate the resources, was very much part of their right. This is a question of their right given by the constitution. So that's the specific meaning within which we need to understand decentralization, that you can distribute different things, you can make it decentralized per se, but decentralized planning has a specific meaning in terms of how the formal parts of the state have their shares of powers and responsibilities as statutorily defined under the constitution, under the framework of constitutional federalism. So that's the meaning we need to understand. Now, discussion is required so as to see this decentralized planning within the specific framework of constitutional federalism in the country, distributing power and the resources also. So therefore, the planning has to be bottom-up. That the decentralization means that you have to have a bottom-up approach. So you need to have the grassroots plan first, then these will be collated and integrated into the districts, and then all districts together will give the state, and that state will go up to the central. And that is how the grantees, priorities, and goals are to be set, and these are to be followed up. Now, at the same time, this process ensured that how do you arrive at this consensus? How do you arrive at these negotiations? It actually necessitated the kind of wide consultation for consensus building. So planning at the state level, planning at the local level, both required huge consultation. At the same time, the Planning Commission used to have large number of consultations with different stakeholders, including state and local government institutions. So therefore, not only this was a federal structure, part of the federal structure, it was also ensuring a bottom-up approach requiring a consultation and consensus building process, which was seen as an essential component of democratic decentralization in the country. So this is where you need to understand the relevance of decentralized planning in India. And that is why I've said it is to be seen as a larger part of the democratization process that India had attempted. So not only you have the parliaments, not only you have the state assemblies, but you also have a larger sphere for consultation, debate, discussion, dialogue, and then consensus building. And this was made a part, statutory part of the constitution, ensuring that this kind of planning will be there, and then this kind of planning was seen as something complementary to the process of democratization. So that's very important to understand. Now, of course, India had, from the very beginning, attempts at decentralization. It started with as an Gandhian ideal. In Gandhi, we have seen that he talked about the village level planning, where village will be planning for self-sufficiency given their local resources. That was the kind of plan for Gandhi. And after independence, in the first plan, attempts were made to formalize the decentralized planning, that how to formalize it. You have, of course, the state government within the constitutional federal structure, and then state plan and state finance commission was there. At the same time, you need to have go beyond state, sub-state level, so up to the grassroots. So therefore, since first 5-year plan, they were thinking that how to make this plan as a part of grassroots level politics and grassroots level development discourse. So that's the kind of attempts we have been trying. And first plan talked about block level planning, and thereby community development blocks were identified as a planning unit. And subsequently, you have number of committees. For instance, Balwant Raj Mehta Committee in 1957, they talked about 3-tier planning, village, block and district panchayat. And you have, of course, constitutionally defined state and the state center. The second plan from 56 to 61 talked about participation of people, and they talked about district development council, which will be entrusted with which was entrusted with the responsibility of drawing up village level plans. And then in 1967, you have got the administrative reform commissions, which advocated not only the planning but also advocated that these units must be given the resources, enough resources, so that effective plan formulation can be done. Then in 1969, the Planning Commission provided a guideline to further formalize this idea of grassroots planning, and they have given a kind of concept and methodology for district planning. They have made a provision for district planning body through which this is to be done. And in 1978, you have got Ashok Mehta Committee as well as Dantwala Committee, where block level planning was seen as something intermediate level planning, linking between the district and the villages. And in 1984, Hanuman Rao Committee talked about very concretely that for effective grassroots level planning or decentralized planning, you need to have 3 things: the functions, fund, and functionaries. That you need to delegate, as we have done it for state and the center. You need to delegate certain subjects to the local bodies, and you need to give them the fund, and also you need to give the functionaries. The departments are to be there within their purview, so that they can plan accordingly. And they have also talked about district planning board. It will be interesting to see that some of the recommendations of these different commissions, guidelines and committees were taken when we have moved from earlier phase to 73rd and 74th amendments. I think you need to understand the consequence and the significance of 73rd and 74th amendment. It has made tremendous departure from the earlier phase. As we have seen that all along, the various plans tried for decentralization and various experiments were attempted at the block level, village level, district level, providing guidelines and so on and so forth. So therefore, in terms of planning unit, available resources, participation, we have got the enormous number of experiments, but most importantly, all these attempts lacked constitutional or statutory provisions. This was not seen very much as a part of formal federal structure within the constitution, sharing of power or resources. 73rd and 74th Amendment made PRIs and ULBs part of the formal federal structure. Amendment came in just after the economic liberalization in 91, and then in 92 you have these amendments. It has made three very distinct contributions. The first, as I have mentioned, that it has made 11th and 12th schedule, where you have delegated the 29 subjects to the PRIs and 18 subjects to the ULBs, providing power to tax on those things and also to plan for those things. You have got Article 280 institutionalizing the Finance Commission, where the share of the taxes was divided between center and the state. You have made amendment to the Article 280, where you have made a part of the State Finance Commission delegation of certain resources to the panchayats, and also you have institutionalized the Article 243I for State Finance Commission to mandatorily give the resources to the panchayats and the urban local bodies, and then you have Article 243Z(d) that institutionalized District Planning Committee as a planning body at the grassroots. So therefore, all these concerns regarding functions, fund and functionaries, the district panchayats seen as an authority, and these 73rd and 74th amendments actually made this institutionalized within the constitutional federalism of the country. So therefore, this is important to understand. This is precisely the 73rd and 74th amendment. We have a very distinct phase of decentralized planning in the country. Elections were there, and of course there were issues of convergence. We will discuss this in a bit. You have got the planning process as something like this, that in the GP level, the plan will be prepared by the Gram Sabha, and ward level plan will be prepared by the area Sabha. And you have to have a long-term envisioning exercise where goal setting, prioritizing will be there in terms of setting the long-term vision. Then you have a medium-term plan in terms of perspective plan for, say, about 5 years, where we will be mapping the resources, and also we will be listing the activities so that convergence can be achieved across the sectors, across the departments. And then finally you have the annual plan, where we will try to prioritize the activities listed in the perspective plan based on the local need and the resource availability. And then we have a bottom-up approach. All these exercises are to be done at the level of the PRIs, from Gaon Panchayat, then Anchalik Panchayat, Jilla Parishad, then urban local bodies, ward and municipality, and so on and so forth. The one problem was the problem of aggregation. It was decentralized, but at the same time, it was supposed to be an integrated planning. Now, let me just briefly touch upon the role of Ministry of Panchayati Raj in this whole decentralized planning framework. The Ministry of Panchayati Raj assumed a much larger role of this decentralized planning. In fact, it has tried all kinds of support. It has extended, it has provided training in terms of capacity building of the PRIs, functionaries, and so on and so forth. And they have also sort of produced a report, which is known as the Devolution Index report, where you have ranked the different panchayats and different states and different districts within this index. Now, all these contribution was seen as something, as I have told earlier, as a part of the larger goal of democratic decentralization. Now, if we look at the present status, then we see, of course, that district planning exercise that was there under the 73rd and 74 is getting increasingly replaced by other forms of decentralization, such as program-specific planning like MGMREGA, PMGAY, where the beneficiary selection is the main criteria. And in some sense, therefore, the relative significance of district planning and role of MOPR is reduced to a great extent. So you have the possible implications for democratic decentralization when this kind of process of democratization is affected negatively or adversely. So finally, let me sum up today's discussion. So decentralized planning was an ideal in Indian planning and was perceived as an important instrument for democratization. The question was to formalize it within the Indian federal structure. And accordingly, we have seen that there are three distinct phases, 51 to 91, where experimentation was there without any statutory provision. From 92 to 2014, the exercise was there with statutory provisions. And after the abolition of Planning Commission, 2014 until date, then we are seeing that gradually waning of experimentation and the exercise. So these are the three phases of decentralized planning in India. So obviously, the planning in India has become almost a part of history, and consequently, decentralized planning has been transformed to a part of program implementation. And even though statutory provisions still exist, so therefore, this waning of decentralized planning significantly circumscribes the process of democratic decentralization, participation of people in the process of decision making. So this has a huge implication for democratization process in general and democratic decentralization in particular in the country. So we have seen a discussion on the very important aspect of decentralized planning, and we will follow up these issues that we have raised in our subsequent sessions. So with this, I end today, and we will see that how this discussion can be taken forward in our subsequent sessions that will be followed. Thank you.